Welcome to the House of Horrors, where every story whispers from the shadows, and every sound hides something watching you back. You're here at the perfect time. Maybe it's midnight where you are, or maybe you're watching from the other side of the world. But no matter the hour, darkness always finds you. If you dare to stay, turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and don't forget to subscribe. And also tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it there? So let's begin. The House That Answered Back. In a small town in southern New Mexico, where most people know each other by name and nothing ever really changes, a family moved into a house that had been empty for a long time. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, slightly separated from the others, with dry land stretching behind it instead of another row of homes. The price was unusually low. When the father asked the real estate agent why no one had lived there for years, she hesitated before saying the owners had simply moved away. The neighbors didn't warn them either. Whenever the house came up in conversation, people changed the subject or gave short answers, as if they didn't want to think about it. At first, everything seemed normal. The house was old but solid. Thick walls, heavy doors. The kind of home built to last decades in desert heat. The first few nights passed quietly, until they began hearing sounds after midnight. It started as a soft tapping. At first, they thought it was pipes or the house settling. The sound came from inside the walls, faint but deliberate. 3 taps. Always 3. Then silence. One night, the father stood in the hallway and placed his hand against the wall where the tapping came from. He knocked back, lightly, as a joke. 3 taps answered him immediately. The sound was perfectly matched. He laughed it off, but he didn't knock again. The following night, the tapping returned on its own. 3 taps, from a different wall. Then again, from the ceiling. Then from behind the bedroom wall. It moved. The mother began to feel uneasy. She said the house felt aware, like it reacted when they spoke. Lights flickered only when someone mentioned the noises. The tapping stopped when they argued and resumed when the house was quiet. Their young son started asking questions. Who's knocking? Why does the house listen? They told him it was nothing. Then the house began responding. One evening, the mother, frustrated and tired, whispered, "Can you please stop?" The tapping stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt wrong. Too complete. The father tested it later. Standing alone in the kitchen, he said out loud, "Do it again." 3 taps answered him from inside the wall beside the refrigerator. His stomach dropped. From that night on, the family avoided speaking loudly after dark. But even whispers seemed to carry. The tapping became more precise, almost conversational. 3 taps meant yes. 1 long tap meant no. Sometimes the taps came immediately after a question was asked, before anyone finished speaking. The worst change happened when doors started moving. A bedroom door slowly closed itself while the room was empty. A cabinet door opened after the mother said she needed a glass. The front door unlocked itself once, quietly, in the middle of the night. The son began talking to the hallway when no one was there. He would sit on the floor and whisper, nodding as if listening. When asked who he was talking to, he said, "The house. It knows our names." One night, the father woke up to knocking from inside the wall directly above their bed. Not tapping. Knocking. Firm and rhythmic. As if someone was trying to get out. He shouted for it to stop. The knocking moved to the ceiling above the hallway. Then above the living room. It was following his voice. The final night came without warning. The family was sitting in the living room when the son suddenly stood up and stared down the hallway. His face went pale. "It's mad," he said quietly. Before they could ask what he meant, the knocking started everywhere at once. Walls, ceiling, floor. Not loud, but relentless. Surrounding them. The lights flickered violently. The father yelled, "What do you want?" For the first time since they moved in, The house answered with something other than knocks. A voice came from inside the wall at the end of the hallway. Low. Calm. Certain. You're in my place. The son began crying. The mother grabbed him. The front door unlocked itself again, slowly. They didn't pack. They didn't turn off the lights. They ran. They drove until sunrise and never returned. Later, they learned something no one had told them. The house was built directly over the remains of an older structure that had burned down decades earlier. The original owner had died inside, trapped when the walls collapsed. The new house had been built using parts of the old foundation. The family still avoids talking about what lived there, because it didn't feel like a ghost. It felt like a homeowner, the bus stop that no one remembers. Outside Santa Fe, along a stretch of rural road that winds through desert plains and low mesas, there is a bus stop that almost no one talks about. It sits at the edge of the pavement, a simple metal bench under a faded shelter, surrounded by empty scrubland. No streetlights reach it, and no bus routes ever stop there. Some locals swear it was never officially built, just a forgotten remnant from decades ago. For years, it was ignored. Drivers passed it without noticing. Occasionally, hikers or travelers would see it and assume it was abandoned. But over time, strange reports began to surface, and people started to take notice. It started with the night drivers. Alone on dark roads, they would see someone standing at the bus stop. Always a single figure. Always still. Never moving, never waving, never acknowledging passing cars. At first, people assumed it was a hitchhiker waiting for a friend or a vehicle. But something about the figure was unsettling. The way it stood. The way it didn't react. One night, a man named Harold was driving home from a long shift at a warehouse. The road was empty, and he was tired. Around 1:30 a.m., he noticed a woman standing at the bus stop. She was wearing a long coat and a scarf wrapped tightly around her face, her eyes barely visible. Feeling uneasy, Harold slowed down and rolled down his window. "Are you okay?" he called out. The woman did not respond. She didn't even blink. She simply stared at the approaching car. Something about her posture made him feel like she was observing him, not just seeing him, but examining him. Harold stopped the car. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. The woman didn't move, didn't acknowledge him in any way. He got out of the car, cautiously, hoping she would answer. But when he took even a single step toward her, she vanished. He looked around frantically. The desert was empty. No footprints. No sign of her leaving. It was as if she had never been there at all. Shaken, Harold drove home and later reviewed his dashcam. What he saw made his blood run cold. On the video, he was speaking to someone, clearly talking, clearly moving toward the bus stop, but there was no figure in the video. Nothing at all. Except in the reflection of his windshield, there was another face. A second face. Pale. Smiling. Watching him. Harold never drove that road at night again. Other reports followed. A group of teenagers camping nearby saw the figure appear, standing rigid at the edge of the road as their car passed. They turned around, hoping to get a better look, but every time, the figure would vanish, only to reappear farther down the road. It was like it was following them, but never moving faster than the speed of their car. A delivery driver told authorities he stopped at the bus stop one night to make sure no one was hurt. When he approached, the air grew inexplicably cold. A low hum seemed to come from the shelter, and the gravel around it crunched under invisible footsteps. He swore he saw shadows moving just beyond the edge of the light. But when he looked again, everything was still. Some say the figure is not human. That it moves between moments, appearing and disappearing, shifting like the desert heat haze. Others claim the bus stop itself is a portal of sorts, a place where the living occasionally brush against something from another time or another plane of existence. The most terrifying report came from a man named Joseph. He was a night shift worker and drove this road regularly. One night, he saw a small child standing at the bus stop. Joseph, terrified but concerned, rolled down the window and asked if the child needed help. The child smiled, then spoke in a voice that sounded exactly like Joseph's own sister, who had died years earlier. "I'm waiting for you," it said. Joseph's hands went numb. He tried to drive away, but the car stalled. The headlights flickered, and when they came back on, the child was gone. No footprints. No explanation. Just the bus stop, empty as before, under the silent desert sky. Authorities investigated after multiple reports. There was no bus route there. No official shelter. No record of construction. Yet the structure was undeniably real, standing perfectly intact on satellite images and in the memory of those who had seen it. Locals avoid it now, warning travelers not to stop or even look directly at it after dark. Those who do claim the figure watches them, waiting silently, calculating their movement, disappearing only when they turn to check. Some researchers speculate it's a natural optical phenomenon, mirages, light refraction, or a combination of heat and shadows. Others believe it is something more deliberate, something aware, something that uses the bus stop as a lure. Drivers continue to report the same figure, even decades later. Some say the smile never changes. Some swear that the figure steps aside when you get too close, only to return when you look away. What makes it truly terrifying is the consistency of the accounts. Across different decades, the same descriptions appear: a single person, standing silently, never blinking, watching, smiling, waiting. The bus stop is still there. Travelers sometimes drive past during the day and see nothing unusual. But at night, in the quiet stretches of road, the stories persist. And the desert waits, watching, for the next person to arrive. No one knows what the figure wants. And those who have stopped to find out never speak of it again. The radio signal from the mesa. In the high desert of western New Mexico, beyond the sparse towns and winding dirt roads, there are stretches of land that seem untouched by time. Wide mesas rise abruptly from the flat plains, casting long shadows over the sand and scrub that stretches for miles. Locals rarely go there at night, claiming that the mesas themselves feel alive. The wind seems to carry whispers, and radios sometimes pick up signals that shouldn't exist. A few years ago, an amateur radio operator named Daniel decided to camp near one of these mesas. He was experienced, a hobbyist who loved scanning shortwave frequencies in remote areas, hoping to catch rare transmissions from faraway stations. He wanted solitude, a night of pure observation, far from cities, from cell towers, from interruptions. He arrived late in the afternoon, carrying his equipment in a rugged backpack. He chose a flat patch of sand at the base of a mesa, overlooking the darkening plains. As the sun sank behind the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of crimson and purple, he set up his antennas, calibrated his receiver, and switched on the radio. At first, it was normal. Static. Distant voices, faint and broken, the occasional tone of a far-off transmission. Nothing remarkable. But then, after night had fully settled and the temperature had dropped sharply, Daniel heard something strange. A voice. It wasn't faint or distorted like the usual crackling from a weak signal. It was clear, calm, and deliberate. And it said something that made Daniel freeze. Daniel. His name. Spoken clearly. From somewhere in the darkness. He glanced around the campsite, half expecting a hiker or a local to be playing a joke. There was no one. Just the desert, wide and silent. He realized then that his radio had been in the receive mode only, he wasn't broadcasting anything. And the voice had come from the equipment, from nowhere, perfectly audible through the speaker. Daniel's heart raced. He tried to convince himself it was a trick of the wind or an overactive imagination. He adjusted the dial, switching frequencies, scanning the channels. Nothing. Then, the voice returned. You're not alone. This time, it was closer. Clearer. He could almost feel it near him. Daniel's hands shook as he wrote down the words. He tried to talk back through the microphone, asking questions, but there was no response. Only the voice. Only the message that seemed tailored specifically for him. As he kept scanning, the transmissions became more frequent. Now there were multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in languages he couldn't recognize. Some repeated his name, some whispered phrases he could only partially understand. Then, through the crackle, he heard details he shouldn't have known, the exact position of his truck, the color of his jacket, even the way he had tied his boots. Panic set in. Daniel tried to pack up, but the more he moved, the louder the voices became. They seemed to anticipate his actions, always one step ahead. When he turned on his headlamp, the shadows around the mesa appeared distorted. Shapes flickered just at the edge of his vision, vanishing when he looked directly. Then the radio spoke again, slowly, almost casually. "We're above you." Daniel froze, staring at the mesa's cliffs. The sky was clear, the stars countless and indifferent. No aircraft, no helicopters, no lights. Nothing. Yet the words felt undeniable, coming from somewhere that was neither here nor completely absent. He recorded the transmission, thinking he could analyze it later, but the static that followed seemed alive, almost deliberate. The hum of the radio changed, forming a rhythm he could feel through the ground, pulsing under his feet like a heartbeat. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed irrelevant. Every step Daniel took, every adjustment to his equipment, was mirrored by an increase in the intensity of the voices. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The static cut out. The radio powered itself off. For an hour, Daniel sat in silence, unable to move, fearing that any sound might trigger whatever had been communicating with him. When he finally dared to restart the radio, it was dead. No signals, no static, no voices, just silence. The next morning, he left the mesa without retrieving some of his gear, too shaken to even notice. On the drive back to town, he kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following him through the desert. But there was nothing. Just endless sand and rock, peaceful as if nothing had happened. Weeks later, Daniel listened to the recording in his apartment. The voices were still there. Clear, deliberate, impossibly precise. But something else had emerged. Beneath the voices, he could hear breathing, not his own, and not human. Slow, heavy, measured. A sound that suggested presence, intelligence, observation. He attempted to share the recording with fellow radio enthusiasts. None could explain it. None heard the signals like he did. Some suggested he had misinterpreted interference. Others refused to comment, citing superstition. Daniel never returned to that mesa. He stopped using shortwave radios entirely. He moved his antennas inside, away from open desert spaces. Even the thought of camping in New Mexico's mesas brought a cold shiver. Locals, of course, say the mesas have always been like this. That they collect information, store it, watch the people who enter. And if you are curious enough, or foolish enough, to listen, the mesas will answer. Daniel's recording remains untouched in his safe. He refuses to play it in the dark. He will not allow anyone else to hear it. For when the voices speak, they do not simply communicate, they know. And in the high desert of western New Mexico, some say the mesas are still waiting. Waiting for the next person brave, or unlucky, enough to listen. The man who walked into the storm. In late spring, just outside Las Cruces, New Mexico, sudden sandstorms are not uncommon. The desert can go from calm quiet to violent and blinding in minutes. Locals call it the wind that moves alone. Travelers, especially at night, are advised to stay off the empty highways that cut through miles of barren land. One evening, around 11:30 p.m., a sandstorm developed faster than expected. Visibility dropped to nearly zero. Drivers on the highway slowed to a crawl. Headlights barely illuminated the yellow dividing lines, and the howling wind carried grit that stung the eyes and burned the skin. Several drivers reported something strange during that storm. A man appeared, walking calmly along the side of the highway. No coat, no protective gear, nothing shielding him from the sand whipping past. He moved steadily, arms swinging slightly, completely oblivious to the storm. At first, drivers assumed he was insane or lost. One trucker, named Luis, slowed and flashed his high beams. The man did not flinch. He did not stumble. He simply walked. Luis rolled down his window. "Hey! Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" The man didn't answer. Not a word. Not a nod. Just continued walking. Luis, concerned, decided to follow him at a safe distance. The man kept pace perfectly, even as the truck accelerated. No matter how fast Luis drove, the distance between them stayed exactly the same. Frightened, Luis called 911 to report a possible stranded pedestrian. The dispatcher asked if he could safely pull over. Luis glanced around. The storm was chaotic. Cars were scarce, visibility worse than a few feet. There was nowhere to safely stop. Suddenly, Luis blinked. When he looked again, the man had disappeared. No footprints in the sand, no disturbance of the roadside debris, nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Other drivers later reported similar experiences. A delivery driver saw the same figure during a different storm a week later. He tried to stop, but his truck stalled. When he looked back, the man had moved impossibly close, standing just at the edge of the headlights, then vanished the moment he looked again. Some locals believe the figure is a ghost of someone who died on that stretch of highway decades ago. Others say it is a spirit bound to the desert, a guardian or a warning. Yet there is no consistent story, no record of the person's death, only the accounts of those who saw him. One of the most disturbing reports came from a couple traveling from Albuquerque. They had missed their exit and ended up on the empty highway during a sudden sandstorm. The man appeared about a mile ahead. They slowed, unsure whether to pass him or stop. He walked straight into the storm. Then something happened that terrified them both. As their car approached, the man turned his head. Or at least, it seemed as if he did. His eyes reflected the headlights, but they were wrong. Blacker than they should have been, with no whites visible. The couple said the feeling of being watched was overwhelming, a cold, heavy presence that pressed against them even through the car doors. By the time they passed him, the storm had cleared for just a moment. They looked back. He was gone. No footprints. No dust disturbed. Nothing. Even more unsettling, several drivers claim that after these encounters, the highway itself seems different. The same stretch of road that should take 10 minutes now feels longer. Landmarks appear and disappear. The desert seems to shift. And sometimes, late at night, you can hear footsteps just off the road, even when no one is there. Authorities have no explanation. Traffic cameras rarely cover that part of the highway, and those that do show only empty roads. No one is ever found when someone goes looking. Rescue teams have scoured the desert multiple times, especially after storms, but nothing is ever found. Locals now advise travelers, if you are caught in a storm at night on that highway, stay inside your vehicle. Do not get out. Do not try to approach anything that looks like a person. And no matter how tempting it is, do not follow. Some say the man is a warning. Others think he is a lure, testing human curiosity, patience, and fear. A few even claim that he is not one entity, but a manifestation, a shape that the desert itself creates during violent sandstorms, using your mind against you. One driver, an experienced long-haul trucker, said he had a dashcam recording from one of the storms. Watching the footage afterward, he saw nothing unusual, until he noticed a figure faintly reflected in his side mirror. The reflection was taller than a human should be, its limbs elongated and oddly still, staring at him with impossible intensity. The trucker swore he never turned his head, yet in the reflection, the figure moved ever so slightly, as if tracking him. The strange thing about all these reports is consistency. Drivers describe the same basic appearance, a man, tall, calm, walking steadily into the storm. No one has described clothing, hair, or distinguishing features reliably. It's as if the figure is meant to be generic, anonymous, but unmistakably present. Over time, people have stopped reporting it to authorities. They know they won't be believed. They know their stories sound insane. But on desert forums, in hushed conversations, the tales persist and the highway remains. The desert stretches wide, silent, and unforgiving. The mesas stand like watchtowers over the flat plains. The sandstorms appear without warning, and during these storms, the man still walks. Steadily. Calmly. Into the wind, into the dust, into the night. And no one knows where he goes. Or if he is still watching. The mirror that showed tomorrow. In the quiet hills of northern New Mexico, there is a small town known for its estate sales. The residents often sell antiques that have been in their families for generations, old wooden furniture, porcelain dolls, jewelry, and sometimes mirrors. One autumn afternoon, a woman named Clara was browsing through a sale on the outskirts of town. Among the dusty antiques, she found a large, ornate mirror. Its frame was carved with intricate patterns she could barely make out, twisting vines and faces that seemed almost human when the light caught them at certain angles. The glass itself was slightly warped, the surface rippling as if it were alive. It wasn't cheap, but Clara was drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. She bought it and brought it home, placing it in her bedroom. The first night, she noticed something odd. The mirror reflected her bedroom accurately, but there was a slight delay. If she moved her hand, her reflection lagged by a fraction of a second. She shook it off, assuming it was a trick of the glass. The next night, it got stranger. Clara woke up in the middle of the night and saw her reflection raise its hand before she did. She froze, unsure if she was imagining it. Her reflection smiled faintly, though she herself had not. Heart pounding, she reached out to touch the glass. The moment her fingers met it, the mirror went dark, as if the glass had absorbed the light of the room. By the third night, the mirror was impossible to ignore. Clara began to notice small discrepancies. Her reflection would move slightly out of sync with her expression subtly different. Sometimes, it looked sad, or angry, or amused, when she felt neutral. The most chilling moment came when her reflection spoke. Not words, but a whisper that came from the glass, faint and impossible to locate in the room. "You'll see soon." Clara recoiled, but no one was there. She turned on every light in the house, but the whisper came again, repeating itself, like the glass knew she was listening. The following morning, she noticed bruises on her arms. Small, deep indentations in the shape of fingerprints. She had no memory of getting them. It was as if her reflection had reached out from the other side of the glass. Over the next week, things escalated. Clara's reflection began doing things she did not. Sometimes, she would catch herself standing still while the reflection moved her arms or tilted her head. Other times, it would smile when she was frowning. Objects in the reflection would appear slightly different. A book on her nightstand might be open in the reflection when it was closed in reality. By the second week, Clara refused to be alone in the room at night. She covered the mirror with a sheet, but even then, she felt it. The presence of something watching, waiting, aware. The whispers became more insistent, though still unintelligible. One night, she couldn't resist looking. She removed the sheet and stared into the warped glass. The reflection was no longer an exact copy of her room. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, and in the corner of the glass, she could see herself sitting upright in bed, but in reality, she was lying down. Her reflection raised a hand and beckoned. Clara stepped back, tripping over the rug. The reflection smiled, wider than a human smile. Then it did something impossible. It blinked, and the blink wasn't synchronized with her own. The next morning, Clara discovered another bruise, this one shaped like a hand over her mouth. She did not remember falling asleep in that position. Fear settled in like a stone in her chest. She knew something was crossing from the glass into her world, or perhaps the other way around. Clara attempted to destroy the mirror. She tried smashing it with a hammer. The glass cracked, but it did not shatter. Small fractures appeared, yet the reflection remained intact, smiling at her through the broken lines. She tried throwing it into a dumpster, but when she returned home the next morning, it was in her bedroom, untouched. She consulted local historians and antique dealers. One older man recognized the mirror. He had seen it decades ago in the home of a family who claimed it showed what would happen tomorrow. They had been driven out by fear, the man said, and the mirror had passed from estate to estate, always returning to someone willing to take it. Clara realized, with growing horror, that the mirror did not simply reflect reality, it predicted it. The bruises, the gestures, the altered movements, her reflection was showing what would happen next, not what was happening now. The final night came when Clara saw something in the glass that made her scream. Her reflection was gone. In its place stood a figure, dark, undefined, yet unmistakably her. But it wasn't her. The figure smiled and mouthed words she could feel rather than hear. "It's your turn." Clara fled the house. She left the mirror behind, never looking back. Neighbors reported seeing lights flicker inside her bedroom for days after. Occasionally, a faint whisper drifted through the walls, though the house had been empty. She has never returned, and she refuses to speak about it in detail. She only warns others, never take something you cannot understand. Some reflections are not harmless, and some mirrors do not show your world, they show the one waiting for you. The mirror remains, somewhere in New Mexico, waiting for the next person brave, or foolish, enough to look. The emergency alert that never happened. It was a quiet night across several counties in New Mexico. Most people were asleep. The towns were dark, the desert silent, and even the small highways saw little traffic. The night was ordinary, unremarkable, until around 2:11 a.m. Across multiple phone networks, residents received an emergency alert. The message was short, alarming, and absolute. Do not look outside. This is not a drill. The alert appeared on phones, smartwatches, and even some connected home devices. Notifications buzzed relentlessly, waking people from sleep. Residents jumped out of bed, hearts racing. Many instinctively peeked out of windows or doors. But they were hesitant, because the alert had said not to look. Some people did not obey. Curiosity, disbelief, or simple defiance led them to glance outside. Those who did described a strange, oppressive darkness. The air felt heavier, as if it carried a weight pressing down on their skin. Shadows seemed to move unnaturally. Even though the streets were empty, it felt as though something, or someone, was out there, watching. Others stayed indoors, trembling, too scared to peek through the blinds. Phones buzzed again. Messages repeated. Do not look outside. Remain inside. They are watching. Panic began to spread. Families huddled together. Some called neighbors. Many tried to call 911. But when authorities were reached, no one confirmed any emergency. No storm. No fire. No active threat. Nothing. The alert vanished just as suddenly as it had appeared. Screens returned to normal. Phones quieted. Smart devices resumed normal operation. Residents were left confused, frightened, and shaken, with no explanation and no evidence of what had just occurred. In the days that followed, screenshots circulated online. People compared timestamps, devices, and carriers. The phenomenon was real, but no official records existed. Authorities denied issuing the alert. Telecom companies said their systems showed no mass broadcast. The Federal Emergency Management Agency FEMA reported no unusual activity, yet those who experienced it insist it happened. Multiple counties. Hundreds of residents. The same chilling message at the same exact minute. Some began to notice strange coincidences afterward. Birds refused to land on streets. Domestic animals became unusually restless at night. Power fluctuations occurred only at exactly 2:11 a.m., often lasting for a few seconds. And, inexplicably, some residents reported hearing faint whispers outside their homes in the middle of the night, voices that stopped when anyone tried to listen carefully. One man, a teacher in a small town, claimed that after the alert, he saw a figure standing near the edge of his yard. Tall, dark, and perfectly still, it vanished when he blinked. A neighbor reported a similar figure near a bus stop on the outskirts of town at the same hour. Others spoke of shadows that moved against the natural direction of light. Some theorized it was a glitch, a software error that somehow crossed multiple devices and carriers simultaneously. But the precision, the timing, and the repeated warnings, they are watching made such explanations feel hollow. A few nights later, some residents woke to their phones vibrating. Incoming messages appeared, but they were blank. No sender, no number, just empty notifications. Some screens flashed with cryptic symbols. Again, no one could explain it. Authorities remained silent, refusing to acknowledge the phenomena, leaving those affected in fear and doubt. A local radio host tried to investigate, interviewing people across the counties. Every story was the same: sudden alert, warnings, oppressive darkness, and fleeting shadows. Those who had resisted looking outside felt a strange sensation, a heavy presence pressing against them, almost tangible, as if the alert had not been about a natural disaster, but a warning. People began to report strange dreams afterward. Dreams in which they were outside at 2:11 a.m., in complete darkness, staring into a void. Figures approached, tall and silent, but never fully revealed. Many woke sweating, heart racing, certain that they were being observed, even when awake. To this day, the official record claims nothing happened. No alert, no anomaly, no cause. But those who received it, those who felt the night press against their doors, know differently. Some residents refuse to sleep without keeping lights on. Others unplug smart devices entirely. A few have even moved away, unable to reconcile the memory of that night. The alert has never returned, at least, not in the same form. But people report subtle reminders. Glitches on devices at 2:11 a.m. Faint shadows in peripheral vision. Unease that can't be explained. The most chilling aspect is the warning itself: do not look outside. They are watching. No one knows who they are. Some say it is a warning of something beyond human comprehension. Others believe it is a presence linked to the desert itself, an intelligence quietly observing. But the silence and official denials only make it feel more real, more deliberate, more terrifying. And for those who experienced it, every quiet night, every dark stretch of road, every empty desert landscape reminds them, something saw them that night. Something is still watching. The alert may have been brief, but its memory has lasted for years, and the people who remember it are certain of one thing: whatever it was real. The man on the roof. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, there's an old apartment complex on the edge of the city's historic district. It's not particularly remarkable: brick walls, narrow hallways, a few empty parking lots, but for years, residents have whispered about the strange occurrences that happen at night. The first reports were minor. Residents would hear footsteps above their apartments late at night. Footsteps on the roof. At first, they assumed maintenance workers were checking the building or that stray animals had climbed up. But the noise persisted night after night, always around 1:40 a.m., always rhythmic, precise, almost deliberate. Then one night, a tenant decided to investigate. Mark, a college student, had heard the footsteps for weeks and was growing frustrated. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, he climbed the narrow staircase to the roof access door. When he opened it, the rooftop was empty. The city lights glimmered below, the desert hills visible in the distance. A cold wind swept across the roof, carrying the faint smell of dust and asphalt. Mark felt relief, but it was short-lived. As he turned to leave, he froze. Standing near the far edge of the roof was a man. Tall. Thin. Completely still. He wore dark clothing, impossible to identify clearly in the weak rooftop lighting. But what made Mark's blood run cold were his eyes, or rather, the absence of them. His face was featureless, smooth in the dark, yet somehow perfectly human. Mark called out, demanding the man leave. No response. He took a cautious step closer. The man remained motionless. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but curiosity rooted him to the spot. Mark raised his flashlight, and the figure didn't flinch, didn't move. The light reflected off something in its face. Not eyes, not skin, something deeper, darker, infinite. Then the man did something impossible. He stepped closer, but silently. The soundless movement was alien, unnatural, as if gravity itself had no effect on him. Mark's heart raced, the bat in his hand felt heavy and useless. He tried to speak again. "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. Only the presence of the man, staring, or appearing to stare, directly at him. Mark realized his voice was being absorbed by the night. There was no echo, no wind, no sound other than the silent, oppressive stillness. Panicked, Mark stumbled back toward the access door. The figure mirrored him exactly. Every step he took, every breath he drew, it mimicked, perfectly. It wasn't walking in front or behind, it was matching him, timing him, anticipating him. Mark reached the door and slammed it shut. Heart pounding, he locked it and ran down the stairs. When he reached his apartment, he locked every door, checked the windows, and tried to convince himself it had been a hallucination. But he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next night, the footsteps returned at exactly 1:40 a.m. Other residents began to notice. One woman placed a camera facing the roof access door. She slept fitfully that night, waking whenever a noise occurred. When reviewing the footage the next morning, she saw something chilling. At 1:40 a.m., the roof door opened on its own. A tall figure stepped onto the roof, completely still. It lingered for exactly 1 minute, facing the camera, then stepped backward into darkness as if pulled into the shadows. The door closed silently behind him. No one in the building had opened the door. The security system confirmed it had never been unlocked. Over the following weeks, tenants reported seeing him from their windows. Sometimes a shadow moving across the roof. Sometimes a glimpse of a tall figure standing near the edge, staring downward. He never left the building. He never appeared on the street. He was always on the roof, always at the same hour. Some say he is a ghost of someone who died in the building years ago. Others believe he is something older, a presence bound to the structure itself. waiting for the right moment to be seen. A few tenants claimed the figure appeared inside their apartments briefly, just in the corner of their vision, gone when they looked directly. One elderly resident, who had lived there for decades, told a local reporter that the man was watching for something. She said he was patient, waiting for people to notice him. And if you did notice him, it meant he had already noticed you. People who tried to stay awake to confront him reported strange phenomena. Lights would flicker, temperature would drop suddenly, and electronic devices would malfunction. Cameras often recorded static or nothing at all. Only one video ever captured him clearly, and even in that footage, his face was featureless, his presence almost alien. Tenants began moving out. Some cited the fear of the roof figure. Others simply left after sleepless nights. But those who remained claimed he continued to watch, silently, hour after hour, night after night. It has been over a decade since the first reports, yet the man on the roof has never left. He does not interact. He does not speak. He does not move outside the boundaries of the roof. But everyone who has seen him agrees on one thing: he is aware. Every time you notice him, every time you glance at the rooftop in the dead of night, you feel it, the certainty that he is watching you, and you alone. Residents have learned to avoid the rooftop entirely. Some draw curtains tightly at night, avoiding any chance of catching his silhouette. Others leave the building, unwilling to live under that oppressive gaze. And if you ever find yourself in Albuquerque, walking past the historic apartment district after midnight, do not look up. Because if you do, you might see him. Standing silently on the roof. Watching. Waiting. And once you've been noticed, you may never feel truly alone again. So guys, thanks for watching House of Horrors. If you enjoyed this descent into darkness, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell, so you never miss another nightmare. Signing off.